All right, hello everybody. Welcome back to the Off Angle here with the second episode. Of course, we've literally just been discussing, but slightly different positions. Maybe that'll be part of the charm of the show. I'm down on the bottom, and of course, in the top left, we've got Maui joining us today, which is fantastic. You know, thank you very much for hopping on. I know you're very busy and got a few things in the pipeline, so I hear. So appreciate you giving us some time on this fine Saturday afternoon. How are you? You enjoying the weather down in the south in London?
It's actually been really nice for people that use Fahrenheit. Every day for the next week is going to be, I think, 72 to 75 highs, 55 lows. Like how I thought London, everybody's telling me when I get to London it's going to be awful weather, but this is pretty much as good as it gets.
There you go. There you go. Of course, Pranogo as well up on the top right angle, going to be here every show. I hope it's not too early for you. You know, we're on the UK times. It's kind of nice. Last time, I think I'm getting one back because last time I was starting a bit later. So we've balanced it out this week, I guess. But you had a good week, sir. How you doing?
Yeah, pretty good. I mean, the main thing is I'm supposed to try to not wake up at degenerate hours. So when you said 12 p.m., I was like, well, even if something horrible happens, I should definitely be able to make it by then. So thankfully, we're all good on that front. And yeah, although I admit, I didn't actually wake up as early as I was supposed to. But other than that, everything's good. You know, we got some fun stories coming up, I think, as far as the CS space is concerned that I've been keeping my eyes on. And obviously, the only thing that I, compared to everybody else here, am an expert in, actually happens. It's like the once a year thing that happens is all the maps. So I'm looking forward to talking about that. I was checking those out earlier, and that's always a good time when something different happens in that respect. It's a rare time, but a good time. So.
Indeed, indeed. I think we'll kick off with that, right? Like, obviously, we're recording here on, well, during Blast, really, and things are getting underway with that. The end show. We'll move on to talk about that a little bit later, but I think it's a good place to start with the 10-year anniversary and all that good stuff. I guess the first kickoff with that, really. Were you guys happy with the way that update went? I think there was a little bit of hype being built around, you know, Source 2 and all this sort of stuff. I don't know whether it's ever really going to come or, you know, if it does, I think it'll just come at a random time when it's ready, personally. But I don't know, I felt like maybe we could have got a bit more out of our 10-year anniversary update, personally.
I'd say an operation seems like a fitting gift to the community for a time like that because some of the operations aren't even really that high in terms of the involvement for the developers. Sometimes it's just go into deathmatch and then get 15 kills in this very specific way, and it's just not like that takes 1 second for them to add that back into the game. But I guess the whole doing stuff with bots and moving through a custom map, that probably is something where they have to work on it, sure. And there's also the graphics, but I think what I like is that they're just paying homage to it a little bit with the coin and the stickers, and moving more maps around in the pool is nice, at least for matchmaking's sake. But really, none of this actually affects, as far as I'm concerned, the esports side of the picture here. So I guess it doesn't really feel like too much happened when we watch a broadcast like Blast.
Yeah, you know, what's funny is obviously Riptide came out and modified the A1S and, you know, modified a couple other things in the game state. And that felt more like, I mean, I don't know if it's fitting for an anniversary update necessarily, but that felt more like something that was touching every aspect of the game instead of just like, here's some little fun. And yeah, to Maui's point, an operation seems kind of like a no-brainer. You know, the thing is, I'm one of the last few people who rails against microtransactions in gaming at this point. So in Counter-Strike, when you have literally like most of the game's ecosystem, when people aren't busy, you know, checking out the esports side, a lot of the enthusiasts are really centered around the skins and really centered around buying all those things up. So I'm kind of surprised in that vein there wasn't even a case or anything. Like, I guess there were stickers or something as a way to celebrate it, but to me that seems like the most pitiful way to celebrate something is like, here's some things you can scrape on your gun, lol. And it's like, okay, thanks. But yeah, I mean, kill 50 chickens in deathmatch is also pretty pitiful, so maybe that's like it's a good thing that operation didn't end up surfacing. Maybe it always would have been a little underwhelming, I don't know. It always feels like there's a bit of element to, you know, the idea of CSGO as the redheaded stepchild, compared to Dota, obviously. And then of course we completely forgotten about TF2 in the background. They're like in the basement or something, chained up waiting their eventual demise. But as far as Counter-Strike is concerned, I was expecting something a bit bigger. I do think it's nice that we got a couple maps changed over. Some of them are wingmen, which obviously is only affecting casual play. Some of them are obviously more 5v5 oriented. We got Breach, which is actually, it's kind of confusing because if you know anything about like sort of behind the scenes, if you wanted to play that map on the workshop, you had to do Breach 2.0 because it's a rehaul or whatever. Meanwhile, they just called it Breach in the game file, so I'm really confused about like which map I'm supposed to load up if I'm supposed to be analyzing that. Then there's Tuscan, obviously, is like the big one that everybody was excited about. And I guess if we're going to talk about that specifically, like, yeah, I feel like Valve could have given us more. I'm kind of surprised they didn't make another map. I mean, they obviously they're responsible for Vertigo and Ancient. I'm kind of surprised we didn't see like some sort of big hullabaloo, like, oh, look at what we can do 10 years now down the line. It's not like their maps have progressed in terms of quality necessarily, but there was an element of scale, an element of like, here's what we can do with the Source engine. And it feels like maybe the 10-year anniversary thing was like, it could have been a release candidate for Source 2, and that's where most of their work may have gone into. And they didn't hit that deadline, so now here's just the leftovers of what we could scrap together. That kind of is the vibe I get. What do you think, Script?
Yeah, no, I'm in a similar vein. I think that we definitely could have had a lot more out of it. I don't know. I think it's maybe tough as well. Like Valve and CS, like you say, they've never really done these sort of massive things. So it might you have to be careful maybe where you set the expectations and things like that. That they start doing these huge, overhaul and operation. Yeah, it would have been nice. I think in terms of like the comp level that obviously we focus on. I think it's kind of hard maybe this close to the major. They have done it in the past, but obviously people hate it in the past. So I feel like, we've not really had Ancient for too long in the grand scheme of things. It feels like a really good setup, and I think this is the general consensus for after the major, give it a week or two, and it's like, right, Tuscan's going in somewhere, is maybe how it feels. And that also gives a bit of time for the map to actually be played out, because I guess we can segue into talking about the maps that they added, probably mainly Tuscan, right? Because it has obviously had previous iterations and things like that. I don't think it's fantastic. It's a lot of fun, don't get me wrong, like on the level of me playing with my mates. But I think on a higher level, like mid feels a bit clapped, very, very claustrophobic. Not a lot of room for, super effective smokes, maybe. I don't know. It's a difficult one to know this early on. Actually feels like it could be a lot of fun and a lot of really cool clutches, but there's a number of different things. CT rotations seem kind of wrecked because you got so many long range angles, and it just needs like one T to be in a good position on a headshot angle, and you've got like this whole open area that you've got to cross and loads of different places to clear. So I think actually the map needs some work for the nuances of high level CS. But as far as adding that in at the moment, that feels like a nice little move. Maybe we could have had I'd quite like to get Cobble back. I think this would really, placate a lot of people that have the sort of nostalgia bug when it comes to Cobble. I don't know why we can't play the like old version of Cobble. Why it's not just an unplayable, like a non-active duty as it's called map, right? So that definitely tilts me, I think, because I feel like a lot of the player base would enjoy playing things like that. And that would be a nice, here's an old map coming back for the anniversary. It's not, 10 years old also, but like, here's an older map that, you've not seen for a while. Get the whole nostalgia thing, and maybe add in get a season back in, things like that. I think growing the map pool surely has got to be healthy for the game itself. Again, we're sort of like, not really talking about the higher esports level. But there was definitely a little bit missing. It felt more like it's the year anniversary, like the yearly, like, the yearly anniversary update or something like that. Adding a few maps. Tuscan's cool, but I don't think that equals 10 plus years of CS history, because I guess we're also celebrating the two anniversaries are pretty close together of Go and CS itself. Right. So I feel like we could have had a lot more out of this update, to be honest.
Yeah, well, just think about it like from the perspective of somebody who might not play a lot of Counter-Strike right now, but did like that was a significant part of their history as a person, as a gamer, or whatever. And then like they see that there's been a 10-year anniversary update, and they want to get back into the game, and then they get there, and it's just like, oh, here's some community maps, and like, I mean, that's cool, but again, it doesn't feel like there's nothing pulling me back in. If I'm already out of CS, then I don't feel like this update pulls me back in, and you almost want that. I mean, the numbers are apparently doing fine anyway, but it almost feels like this, in order to celebrate the community, like this is, it matters more that you're celebrating people who maybe have moved on, at least in part, but still felt a significant attachment to it, and also the people who have been there for a long time. And I don't really think there's anything for either of those people. Really, the most that you're going to say is Tuscan, but like Tuscan, the idea of like facelifting an old map from the game's history actually seems like something that you would think would have happened across the board for many different cases. It wouldn't just have been literally two guys, like one of them who originally made the map and the other one who's responsible for a lot of community maps, Cat Food. And those two like work together at a community sense to build this map. You'd think Valve would have been doing that or commissioning that maybe for a larger portion of the different maps as like a way to cement the history of the game. Maybe there would be a Cobble update, or maybe there would be, you know, some of these older maps that like we just haven't seen, like obviously Script dropped Season in there. Like, why not? Why wouldn't we have something like that where it's like, remember all the moments that you had on these maps from down the years? Remember some of these maps that maybe never got a proper Go version, but were in 1.6 or something. Look at all this. Look at all what we can do. So yeah, I mean, at least we did get Tuscan, but it does feel like we could have gotten a lot more in that respect. And I don't really see much pulling somebody in who's like a veteran of the game and maybe was looking for an excuse to reinstall the game and check out what they've updated and you know, remember all of the different things that they had back in the day. The most they can do is play Tuscan. So
I would say that I think it's a little bit optimistic to think that anybody that's older in the space is going to be like, oh, 10-year update, this is what's going to bring me back under any circumstances. So I think what they're doing right now is more like, the one thing that I actually would say that some of my older friends are happy about in North America is, in their limited experience playing matchmaking again, some of it seems better because
the rank update. We didn't even talk about that.
Yeah.
Right. So that little rank shift that they did to, I mean, make it a more reasonable bell curve as opposed to whatever the hell was going on in NA prior, that seemed to have improved their matchmaking experience by a considerable amount. It's not like those guys I've talked to are playing like 20 games a day, so they don't have like perfect stats for this. But in the handful of games they did play, they said at least there weren't any cheaters, which is better than what you can say most of the time when you're queuing up in NAMM. Once you hit like DMG, it feels like you're just out there in the wild west of NAMM, and it's like you don't know what's going to happen ever. Whereas in Europe, when I play, I've played a handful of MM games recently, and it's like in Europe, you barely ever, I'd say 1 out of 10 games, maybe you get a cheater, and then it's not really that bad ever. Like, whereas NA, you're you're rolling a die, and every number that isn't 6 is a cheater game. So yeah.
That's
harsh realities of NA matchmaking. Well, you wonder why so many people have gone over to Faceit or some other service.
Yeah,
right? It's
that's
like,
true.
I mean, a lot of these people have to pay in order to get that platform, but they have to install some really, you'd say, invasive or deep-rooted anti-cheat that prohibits other programs even from being installed, depending on what it is. So there's a lot of I'll say sacrifices or inconveniences that you have to deal with if you want to play a cheater-free or less cheater-infested experience. Any step in the better direction there is obviously good. So yeah, the rank update seems like it was mostly targeted at I guess NA and OCE, both of those particular regions. But I mean, it's a global thing. If it's an improvement, it's an improvement. I did like the number of people who thought like, what? I was hard stuck silver and now I'm gold Nova. Isn't this such an improvement? And it's like, okay, well, yeah, I guess so. I don't know. The number of people who were actually like apparently way above their true rank, but like kept below because the system was like so messed up is pretty funny.
Yeah. I don't know, actually. I kept my rank, but I have since entered it away, like demoted a couple times over the past, week or so. So maybe that's part of it, actually.
So you were the opposite story, Scriv? You were stat padding somehow?
I don't know, maybe.
And then the update removed your reduced your rank?
No, I was all good on the day. Got my rank back and it was fine. But maybe it's kind of moved a few people around and
Yeah.
you know, I've been readjusted over time. Maybe that's also another angle. I don't know. But yeah, Maui, have you had chance to, you know, run around on Tuscan and give it a look? Or...
Yeah. I was gonna wrap around back to that. Yeah, I played a couple of games of Tuscan, and I'd say that I think you're right that some of the skyboxes seem kind of limiting in terms of where you can, or at least the ceiling. There's a lot of ceilings on that map,
Yes.
so you can't really throw too many smokes too early. And what I've noticed is if you're going into the B main area, people used to call it SA2. I'm just gonna start calling it B main because it's easier now. I think with that, it feels like you can just get pinched very easily from all three CT sides. You can get pinched from short, long, and mid. Uh, and so it feels like you have to use a lot of defensive utility as a T, which is kind of odd. And it doesn't seem like there's even a great counter in terms of if you're a T and you have guys towards A. You can't really tell them just go rush A right now because there's a million angles you have to clear out if you want to just run into that bomb site. So you're probably going to have a couple people die there. I'd say that right now with Tuscan, things that I would probably try to change is probably take out one out of every four boxes just indiscriminately, just almost at random. I mean, there's probably a method to making it a little bit cleaner, and I would probably like you said, there's a lot of straightaways. Like coming up mid feels really hard. That's
Yes.
something that I don't love about it. So if there's some way in the near future for you to throw, let's say, a smoke from B main or A main that can smoke top mid, so you can, or that kind of the CT kind of mid connector area, I would love that because I just hate having to look left, right, and down the center at the same time because I'm gonna lose one of those. If I pick the wrong of those three angles, I'm gonna lose the fight.
Yeah.
They're good, so that could be improved. I think the best moments I've had have been in terms of playing that map have been on the B bomb site and on the A bomb site. It feels like working through. I guess short B is kind of a fun spot. I've had some fun at, but everything else, like just being stuck in the storage unit areas, the B main A main, feels like not the most fun fight. And I guess it almost feels like you should smoke something off early or just pinch it yourself if you're a T. So I guess that could lead to some faster, quicker gameplay where the number theory gets disrupted very easily. But pro teams never really want to just throw caution to the wind in such a sense and then just charge headfirst with flashes because they might just get opt at the end of the day.
Yeah, it's tough. It's tough. I think maybe a few changes, and like I've said, given some time and people to play it, and hopefully this is one of those where it's like we might not see it fully publicly, but hopefully like behind the scenes, Valve will maybe interact with the pros a little bit, but always an unknown quantity in that sense. I could see it with a few changes, maybe replacing Dust 2, and I think that they would perhaps function as similar-ish on a basic kind of level where, not too advanced in terms of the executes and sort of mid-rounding, faking, whatever, and then a bit more individually based, right? I would say if Cash was still in the pool, I'd say that it could be a great little swap for Cash, like a slightly more claustrophobic kind of Cash in the way that it plays. But obviously not. And I mean, now we are in a bit of a weird position where there's a couple maps in places, and who knows, maybe they design another one, maybe they work on some of these other maps that have been added in, because I feel like Anubis is not a terrible map either, actually. But yeah, I think we're all in the scene at the high level, maybe even at the casual level, probably not so much, but at the high level, like definitely gagging for a map change somewhere.
Yeah, of course.
To be honest, I think Ancient was fun and fresh, and I like the changes they've made recently, but it's hard to move on from here, I think, because you can't. The thing is as well, it's like Vertigo, maybe not as many fans of that across the board, it looks like, but it's still recent in the life cycle. How long are we going to let Mirage sit there? Yeah. So I guess from here, guys, we could expand a little bit and just talk about the wider map pool, to be fair.
Well, yeah, I think. Well, I would actually be curious on your guys' opinion right now. If you would rather see a slight, assuming that they make some changes prior to them adding it to the true active duty 7 map pool rotation, would you rather see Anubis or Tuscan? Because right now I actually kind of get Anubis a little bit better, as in terms of how it should be played, and I think mid should be changed actually for Anubis. I don't like these like double doors happening where it almost feels like if you're a T and you're moving through that, kind of feels Valorant-esque, where it's like you have to just hard left, right clear, which is just, oh, I think that's generally bad design when that has to happen. So if they just slanted a wall or changed a doorway or took it out, maybe something like that, then that map opens up a lot, and I think it could be very fun to watch actually. But so I think almost in a way, I think Anubis is closer to being a really strong competitive map than Tuscan is right now.
Tuscan reminds me a lot of like maybe old Furno, where you were talking about the ceilings, or in this case it's like the skyboxes not being so low, right? And then you also don't really have there is a lot of claustrophobia, there's a lot of boxes, but the thing about Tuscan for me is that it almost feels like it does. It's funny because it's a 10-year anniversary update at the same time. It feels like it could be a map that does actually fit right out the gate, like at one of the beginning maps, and it wasn't iterated on to have the same level of openness, especially like the reception of like strategies and stuff that you might have, where you can line up some nades, you can do some execs, you can maybe do some quick rotations around certain areas and fake it out. Conversely, Anubis has great play and potential for that. Everything with like the whole mid, multiple levels where you can jump down into the water, and then you can threaten either B or A, but mostly B from that position. To the point about the double doors in mid, that does feel like a bit of a flaw, mostly because you can't, like, the only way you can even interact with that spot is if you basically take mid as a T. You have to go all the way up towards the non-door entrance to mid, and then now you can sort of position around the doors. So it's mostly like a flex position for CTs. I think if you gave CTs some cover elsewhere, or just opened that area up so that like maybe the CTs could actually hold the water jump, the little fall into the water, that would be potentially more interesting if they had to like commit to a certain position, and then you can get into this utility battle just to see who can jump down, just to threaten the ability to jump down, and it starts to become more about map control and less about maybe incidental angles. But that's probably the only thing that comes to mind as like a critical problem that really could be solved on that map. I definitely agree with Maui's point that it seems as a better candidate for just being slotted in. That's just my analysis, though. And when you come to the idea of like which one will be slotted in or which one could be, well, Tuscan just has a lot of pull with the community, and Valve usually makes strange decisions about which maps they take out and which maps they put in. So I have no idea which one of the two, assuming it was between those two, would make it through. But I do think that Anubis looks pretty solid, and I would love to see an actual bona fide community map without any sort of historical connections to some older map that most people remember, or many people remember. Something like that coming in to the active duty map pool would be like, it's the first time since Cash, and even Cash was a remake. So like it would probably be the first case, I think, of an actual bona fide community map being put into competitive play at a large scale at this point. So if we could define history by doing that, that would be amazing, just because now you suddenly open the doors. You can't have the argument from precedent. You've set the precedent. Now community maps, if they're good enough, can actually make it through. And good enough is both actually good enough in an objective sense, but also establishing a community pull. Like there's been people who've been asking for Anubis to come back. Admittedly, I'm mostly looking at the subreddit here, and that's a very small percentage of the community. But there's been regular, like, bring back Anubis threads. There's been sentiment from the community, like, they want this map back in. Now it's back in. Maybe the reason why it's back in is because of the community pressure in that respect. Like, few competitive maps, few community-made maps have actually ever achieved that level. Like, the only thing I can think of is maybe Season or something like that, or for a brief amount of time, Sub-Zero, and both of those are from FM Pwn, another established map maker in the scene, right? So, yeah, it would be nice if Anubis did come through, and that would probably be my pick as well. The current map pool has a bit of an issue, not just because I don't like you've heard of TDS. Well, I have A and VDS, where I hate Ancient and Vertigo, and they are an existential threat to democracy and must be removed at all.
What is this? Wait, explain that.
What? You don't know TDS? Come on, bro.
I'm not familiar either, bro.
What is TDS?
Oh my god. Well, people in the comments will understand what I mean. It's It's Trump derangement syndrome.
Oh, of course.
Yeah.
Jesus. Okay.
Existential threat to democracy must be removed at all costs. That's Vertigo and Ancient for me. I just need them out.
I know it by name,
no matter
but
what.
not by acronym, you know.
Sure, yeah. I was trying to be a little subtler, but that's fine. The main thing for me is just those maps are really like everything that I've said about Tuscan not being necessarily fit, and everything I've said about Anubis being like, okay, it has that mid-door issue. Even if the issues were more pronounced, I would still take those maps, not just over these Ancient and Vertigo, but even if those weren't the maps to be replaced, just because, like Script said, we have been desperate for a map pool change for a long time. We want this to be a more regular thing anyway, because it's going to inject a huge amount of life and variety to the scene. If at the end of every major cycle we get a map pool change, at least one, that would be phenomenal in general, because that now you always have something to look back at. And to the degree that there are flaws in the maps, I think it's inarguable that pros will still find a way to make even some of the worst maps that we've ever seen in the competitive space actually watchable in certain matches at the very least. Like, the least watchable Counter-Strike has ever been. Combine the meta with some of the maps that we've seen in some of the states they've been in, it's already happened. And so I don't think it's ever been to the point where I have to turn the stream off and I can't watch the game. Like, and that's with me, and I have stupid standards compared to everybody else. So, like, I'm guaranteeing you that most people would be totally fine and interested even in doing that. Pros would probably complain, as is their right, and then they would eventually, you know, suck it up and start really practicing and drilling the maps, because it's a job more than it's a fun hobby at this point for them. So yeah, they're gonna drill down and find all of the different exploit cases and find the different things that, like what Maui was saying with Tuscan, and which kinds of strategies you have to go through, and it would be better for the game. And that's regardless of whether or not you think Tuscan or Anubis are good maps, as far as I'm concerned. They happen to have community pull. It would make a lot of people very, very interested and invested in the first couple matches played on them. So yeah, definitely get them in the map pool. For what to sub out, I don't know. Like, obviously I'm gonna say Vertigo and Ancient until they're gone, but even, you know, beyond that, I can see arguments for Dust 2 that Scriv was saying. I can see arguments for trying to make the map pool, like, not necessarily more tactical than it currently is, but more scrimmy in a different way, where, like, Dust 2 is obviously considered the scrim god map. The same for Mirage in that respect. If we can get maps that are kind of like that, but different enough in the way that you actually execute on the ideas, that suddenly you can do more interesting things, but it still feels like less of a tactical sense and more of like a fast-paced, snappy, you know, claustrophobic type sense, which is what we were talking about with Tuscan, then I could see value in that as well. We just need a change. We need something to shake things up, I think.
Yeah. I think there's a lot to unpack, really. It's all I'm thinking at the minute as well is, you know, Valve, obviously there are so many different decisions for them, because we can look at it from like an esports perspective. They sort of, you know, a lot of pro, especially your CIS teams and things, still say that Train shouldn't really have been moved. But as far as I'm aware, they just sort of looked at it as like, right, Train is the least played in the active pool, so we need to come up with something to, you know, rejig that. I think they also, with the more recent maps that they've added, Vertigo and Ancient, you know, Vertigo obviously a while ago now, but like, I still feel that there's been a bit of a shift towards faster maps, right? And they do operate a slightly faster brand of Counter-Strike. Maybe from an esports perspective, at the very least, I feel like we have a few different styles, right? Every now and then on my Twitter, the you know, old games of cat. I can't remember what the Twitter's called, unfortunately, and so it's a really bad shout out. But the old games, the old like esports matches of CS crop up every now and then, and it's like from 2014, 2013, you've got these, you know, you got Maniac playing and stuff like this. So every now and then I watch them, and I watched like an LDLC game against Na'Vi, I think, you know, and Na'Vi still with Starix and all this kind of stuff, and it was Anders and Semler, and they were just talking sort of quite a bit about how this entire tournament, they'd had a lot of best of ones, but this entire tournament, they pretty much just had Inferno and Mirage as like the only two maps. And I think we're seeing, again, we'll fully touch on it a little bit later, but we're seeing a bit more variety in even the best of one formats in terms of what maps get picked. So I think actually, like on the grand scheme, there's maybe you know, the bigger picture, there's a lot more variety than there used to be, right? Where, you know, you don't want to play Dust 2 in a best of one because it's got the upset potential. We're not really good at Cobble, or we're not really good at Nuke. You know, one of the teams is probably going to permaban those. Overpass, maybe at that time, had only just been added. So, you know, you end up getting pigeonholed into the same couple maps like every single time. Whereas I think now map pools are deeper from pro teams is one thing, but also you have a bit more of an angle of like, right, we can come to more of a middle ground, or it feels healthier to play faster today and play more aggressive into this team or whatever. There's a little bit more variety in that sense. So I feel like, you know, maybe that's what they're trying to angle towards is get the map pool more interesting in that sense. And like I say, also as well, it applies to the casual game. Although maybe, you know, teams don't play it out that way. When you play an MM, you generally, you know, rounds last like 30 seconds to a minute at least, you know,
Sure.
kind of the mid-level or whatever. But they're trying to angle towards having a few more aggressive maps, a few more faster maps. And maybe that is just part of their MO the past few years in the way that they've kind of been creating. And that's definitely what Tuscan feels like to me, is, again, it'd be another fast-moving map. So kind of to bring it back, you know, I do agree that on paper you could say Anubis feels like the more complete map, at least at the moment. There's maybe a world in which you could argue, because perhaps it's had a few more tries in CSGO as well. It has been, you know, in and out a few times or whatever. But I think that they will want to stick with Tuscan and maybe add it in. It's really difficult, because I think, again, in the same way people talk about Cobble, there's a lot of like rose-tinted glasses and all this nostalgia angle, and actually it might not be a good map, guys. Just because it was in 1.6 doesn't mean that it was necessarily a great map, you know?
Agreed.
What I want to interject, though, is just say kind of why not both? It actually kind of feels like with them adding a few maps into the MM pool at the same time for this update, that they want to look at the stats for a couple of them at the same time. So if they... And I actually, this has been proposed before. I'm not going to say I'm the originator of this idea, but if they did the rotation, so what I'm talking about is like every year at the end of the year, they would take 2 maps and take them out, and then put 2 maps in, and then just do this on a yearly cycle. You can have the assurance that the map that you like, let's say the maps that they take out actually are Mirage, and I'll just pick another like Overpass. And then they add in Anubis and they add in Tuscan. You'll know at the end of the year you're gonna get your favorite Mirage back, you're gonna get your Overpass back, but they are at least moving it along a little bit quicker. And if they had a roadmap, because CS:GO esports is just, it's one of the safest in terms of knowing that this is going to be around for a long time moving forward. Like, this is not, there's no way you could, something to note about a 10-year anniversary of the game is that it's bit like the esports side of it is stronger than ever in terms of viewership. So if you start doing that, you'll put together, say, the set like 5 core maps or whatever. You put together Inferno, Dust, Mirage. I guess Train should be there, honestly, and then I don't know if there's even a 5th core map, but basically like legacy maps that have just been part of Counter-Strike's DNA for its entirety, for nearly the 20 years that it's been played. And then you have kind of a more wild card pool of like the Anubis, the Ancient, the Vertigo, Overpass even would be part of this, and then I actually Nuke would be a legacy map too. It'd be the 5th, but you would then move, 2 in, 2 out, do it so that there's 2 majors in a row that are just using the same map, so no one can complain, hey, why aren't they changing the map after this major? It's like, no, we put it on a schedule that this is going to be at the end of every single year, and all the people that are crying this year about Mirage not being in the pro map pool, you can still play it in MM, you can still play it on Faceit, you just can't play it in your official matches for 1 year. So if you can't adapt for that 1 year on your one-trick map, then that's just your fault at that point. There's tons of other maps that you should be capable of playing, but I would love to see that more than anything, and it feels like Steam or Valve are pushing into that direction, that they want to experiment with multiple maps, gather the statistics, and see what changes need to be made.
Yeah, well, the problem is that we're still not sure why they picked Train to be removed. Everybody seems to have reverse engineered that. This is back when they added Ancient,
right?
Some time ago now. Everybody seems to have reverse engineered that it was statistics based, as like all the playtime. If that's the case, I mean, what's good for the goose is good for the gander, and now their two new maps are on the bottom of the pool, baby.
Yes.
Let's go. So, I mean, I don't know. Like, if you're gonna take a statistically minded approach, then maybe you have to like make exceptions for which ones were added recently. I'm not sure, but I just think for all the people who maybe have some apprehension about the map pool changes and they were concerned about like, oh, you know, is there ever going to be a competitive ready map pool that, or map that comes out of the community or whatever? I don't know if there's a competitive ready map that's ever just manifested by itself. Like, it's been iterated upon, and Valve have had the ability to do that for a very long time with all of the maps they've added. You think of Overpass, you think obviously more recently Vertigo and Ancient. Think of all the different micro updates to Vertigo specifically that were happening during like a major cycle, even during like this whole ordeal where that was the liquid collapse at the end of the Starladder major and stuff. Like, it's like that Vertigo is different than the Vertigo that like some of the teams qualified to the major for, and like all that was happening. You obviously think of the fact that some people were starting the RMR qualifier for Stockholm on train and then had to switch to Ancient like partway through in the later RMRs. I did see the Kerrigan tweet where he's like, can't wait for Valve to add Tuscan in the middle of the RMR cycle. Like, yeah, I mean, Valve have had a sort of track record of just doing this stuff with no real concern about that. So it's hard to say that they would have a concern now, but I do think like if they decide it's time, I mean, better late than never, and it is late, but still, I'm really looking forward to seeing what's cooking, because if it's true that Source 2 is not coming anytime soon and it's actually coming later, then at the very least we have the map pool stuff to look forward to, and it's very evident now, I think. At least if I'm gonna just go by trends, I mean, they added so many different maps to the pool with this update. It's more than they normally just stick in there. So yeah, I mean, the idea is that we're gonna jump in with Anubis and Tuscan. That's very titillating. So let's hope it happens.
All right, so very quick fire here to just sort of finish off this segment before we do indeed move on to the Blast stuff. What map are you removing? What map are you adding? Let's just go with one. You know, we've got the whole cycle, but if you had to get rid of one and add one in, I feel like for me, I would. It maybe needs a few changes, but let's just say, you know, as you've touched on, Prodogo, Valve just do whatever. I'd probably remove Dust 2 and add. Oh, I don't know actually. I reckon I remove Vertigo and add Tuscan. I reckon that's what I'd go with, because I think that those maps, you know, I like the verticality of Vertigo. That's kind of interesting, but I feel like those maps could function in a similar way. You know, I don't know.
So wait, you want to pick one, +1, -1?
Yeah.
Yeah, +1, -1.
Okay, I would just take out Vertigo, and I would add Anubis. Actually, I think we need 3 dusty maps in the pool.
Sure.
There you go. Yeah, I was waiting for minus this 2 plus Anubis just to keep it going. They both have double doors, you know.
Yeah, no, this is just. I mean, this is purely for my own enjoyment. I enjoy watching every map right now more than. I don't know, Ancient and Vertigo. Okay, I'll say this: at Cologne, I really did have fun studying a lot of teams on Ancient and seeing, what I like about Ancient right now is I like watching how people start their CT side, because I don't think there is like a one set way to default yet on that map, which is fun to me, because if we haven't optimized yet that map in terms of playstyle, then I want to keep seeing it develop. Whereas Vertigo, nah, I kind of get it. Like I kind of see where people are going with that map nearly every round. Like the defaults aren't too crazy, or if they are, then it has a very built-in kind of mechanic or like style that they're gonna play because of that. So like if you send 3 mid, I kind of know what's gonna happen on this round. Whereas on Ancient, I don't really know. People still are doing new things all the time. So the only thing about Ancient that I just don't get is that this map works for T's because of a glitch molly. And there's now 2 glitch mollies, I think. So that's one thing that just put a hole in the map or something and fix the glitch, because that should not be part of a team's game plan to use a molly that never gets extinguished in the air. Like that's just dumb. That's just kind of dumb. Okay, but everything else about that map, I have been liking it play out. So my pure enjoyment minus Vertigo, add Anubis.
Isn't the molly actually banned in Blast? Isn't that something? Because they used a similar one for Inferno B-Site, right?
It was banned, and then I think they realized they were the only TO doing that, and it actually changed the map significantly. I don't know the reasoning, but I think they brought it back.
Yeah, I'm pretty sure that's correct.
Yeah, it was one tournament that they Like maybe
like
a
when
fall group.
I think
something?
really early, yeah, in Ancient's
In
kind
the
of
map's
life
life
cycle.
yeah,
as well.
yeah. That might have been
Um,
before the water bug was even fixed too. That was by the way, in case everybody thinks that Valve has a fucking master plan, they shipped a map to competitive where you could just hear footsteps from halfway across the map.
Yeah.
But it's also like that's fine. That's fixed. But
Well, it's fine
the
now.
Molly,
It wasn't
but
fine when it
no,
was
but what I'm
changing the
saying is,
outcome
like,
of games.
no, I get it, but like the Molly
Yeah.
hasn't been touched on.
Yeah.
And I
No,
think
they
this is
haven't
again,
even-
it's maybe where it comes in, where it's like that is just an all round kind of bug or whatever, like, you know, a broken part of the map design. Whereas the Molly, you could argue, is a bit more of an exploit, right? Where
Yeah.
it's like only pro teams are going to use that. Maybe super high level puggers, but you know,
Sweaty
my
tryhards.
guy GN3. He's going to get annoyed that he can hear people running around the map, but, you know, he can barely line up a smoke. You know what I mean? Like, so it's weird. It is really weird that, like, that's not been sorted yet. Or maybe they're just,
it's
too big of a change because it's so fundamental to, like, T-side play.
Yeah, well, I don't know. I mean, with Ancient specifically, it obviously unlocks a lot of things. But that's another thing is like, so Mauisnake was talking about optimization. Like, what can you do with optimization? It's an interesting, and we won't get into the tangent, but it's an interesting thought experiment to think like, what it is a map? Can you elevate or evaluate a map based on how well it can be optimized? Because if it can always be optimized in the sense that like you always have to do X, Y, Z thing, then maybe it's not great. Because like in Overpass, you have to throw this incendiary as a CT, like pretty much every round that you have it available to stop the fountain push. And if you don't, I mean, you could do like some mind games or whatever, like, oh, I threw this, and or I didn't throw it.
Trade.
It's, like,
it's more worth the trade to just take a smoke away from tees to use one of your mollies. That's like I think how people envision this. Because if you have 4 smokes as tees, that's just sometimes you're one short of what you need to make that exist.
Yeah, and so like, but that's a rote task that you have to do, and like a robot could do it with a higher level of accuracy. And it's like, is that really the kind of skill we want to be testing in a competitive game? And I think the same thing is true for an Ancient with this Molly, where it's like, if you have to do it, then that's not great. I do like that Ancient forces CTs to be proactive. Well, I don't like it; it's forced, but I like that it's possible. It's sort of like an Overpass, but with less fallback cover. I think if they added some fallback cover, they would have to change the structure of the map. But then maybe CTs could actually take fights and then fall back, and then it would be optional whether they want to take the more forward engagements. That would probably open things up, where if this Molly doesn't exist, maybe it's not as bad for Ts. But I think, as much as I don't like Ancient, I still probably have to also jump on the bandwagon and remove Vertigo, because I do believe that it is a worse map, fundamentally. I think the sound has never really been an issue that's been triaged. It's a compact map in theory, but you have to like shift walk everywhere if you want to be stealthy, and or I guess you can try to do like mind games where you walk partially and then you start shift walking, and did you continue shift walking in the same direction, or did you go back? But it's like so radically different from what you're normally used to in CS. It's testing a very different set of skills. Maybe that's good. I personally just don't think it plays well, even removing the sound issue from the game. So remove it from the game, get it out, and yeah. I mean, I'm kind of torn. I want to shout out like Iris or something, like one of the maps that just hasn't really seen a lot of play and doesn't grip the community as much. But if I had to pick from one of the maps that was added most recently, I would probably also pick Anubis, just because it does have an element of verticality to it, even though it's much less. And it's more interesting with how it is interwoven into the map. And I really want to see pros mostly just jumping off of that into the water. Like, I feel like there's so many different clutch moments and like fast-paced rounds. We tried to hit B, but we failed. Everybody go A. Like, different rotations you can make on the T side. There's a lot of potential for that, even in this kind of meta that we've developed where it's more CT-sided. I think it would be really fun to watch. So that's my pick as well.
All right. Well, there you go. You know, the Anubis gang, mate. We'll see. Hopefully with this podcast, we can start some kind of revolution.
Yeah. Listen, Maui was trying to rename this bomb sites on Ancient. It hasn't happened yet, but
I kind of
maybe we
it
can
didn't happen, actually. In terms of, not because I thought I would have that much pull, but I actually like this is just, it just feels awkward. I still you know, people still kind of mess up when they talk about them. So it just feels so natural for it to be the other way around.
Valve doesn't even know how to go from A to B. Unbelievable.
Bada bing. All right. Look, let's move on just to sort of contextualize for people. So we are here on Saturday. Just got to double check the date, 20th of August, which is of course the second day of Blast Premier Fall, the group stage, of course. And at the moment, Complexity are facing off against Na'Vi for the consolidation final. So we've not got to see Group C yet, right? FaZe, EG, Heroic, and Big. We don't quite know what to say about them, right? We can conjecture, etc., but there's no sort of visual to go off as yet. But the rest of the teams, the rest of the 8 teams, we can definitely chat about and sort of highlight how things have gone over the past couple of days. Start off with Group A, nice and simple. I think we'll maybe touch on the teams and then talk also about the format, maybe interweave them together. We're about halfway through the show here, so that kind of fits pretty well, to be honest. I don't know. I'd say the big one coming out of Group A, it's got to be Astralis looking better. Still not perfect, still being knocked down, but they did get, you know, the return game on NIP and all that good stuff. So pretty impressed, to say the least, that they have managed to turn things around, but still, you know, nowhere near to what maybe we even expect from this team, let alone Astralis the org.
This was a really weird day because I remember the first game for Astralis, they like BlameF and Config didn't really do anything. But then once they went to the lower bracket, it's like those two heavy hitters that you expect to do well for them warmed up in the second and third game that they played. They played an OG, then they played NIP, and it was like, okay, they're performing how they're supposed to. And then for the fourth one, like the most random people played well, like Farlig and Zipnix, if I'm not mistaken.
Yeah.
And so that's just weird because you kind of expect. So for the second and third game, for the first game, you could say they just started slow. For the second and third game, you could say that this is kind of the normal win condition and the look for Astralis, which is really worrying for a team like NIP because NIP has talked about the fact that they're moving forward using Esatag as their opera. So there's no upgrade on the horizon here. And to lose a map to Astralis in that fashion, on a map Ancient where they were really one of the teams that was trying to use that to their advantage in map vetoes for a long time, is pretty disappointing. I'll say this though, like it's always very strange right after player breaks to see what teams are in form, what teams aren't, because not everybody started the same week of practice that everybody else did. So you don't really know, is everybody on an NIP? Have they been playing? Do they all have 80 plus hours in the past 2 weeks? I hate really having to use that excuse. So I will just give Astralis credit for the fact that it seems like when this team is just in the form that they're supposed to be in, when like this 5 lineup does seem like who they're taking forward as well. They've also said that they're going to move forward without, like, with this 5. I forgot who said it from the Astralis org, but somebody said this is the 5 we're moving forward.
Oh, it was a coach. It would have been
okay. Trace. I think Trace said it. Yeah. So he said that, and if that's the case, even though I think Astralis are ranked top 5 on HLTV right now, where a lot of people probably were like, that's just because they had a really sneaky Cologne run.
Yeah,
that might have been less fluky than we thought, and that's and I it's not like everybody was like, this is a total trash Astralis just making it through, but we were kind of like, yeah, they might actually be a top 8 team or top 7 team, but to say top 5, or I guess they placed top 4 Cologne, for them to be top 4, that felt like a huge reach. But maybe it's not. Maybe they are actually who Cologne showed they were.
The problem with looking at their results so far in Group A is that, like you said, Maui, the most random people were the ones to sort of carry them through that last game, and obviously the Stars haven't been the super consistent ones that we were hoping they would be with BlameF and Config. Like, you can almost always rely on them to do numbers, but then it's almost like a guarantee that at one point in a tournament they will not deliver, and that might be the one where they lose the surprise matchup or whatever. Not that I don't think too many people would have pegged them to completely usurp NIP in that first match. I mean, one of the good things about the format is that it's very snappy, very quick. It's all best of ones. And at the same time, to echo Scrip's point from way earlier, is that we're seeing more variety in the maps for best of ones. I think it was Overpass for the first matchup, and then it turned into Ancient when the veto was changed. And that's an area where you really get to test, like, instant response time. Basically, it's almost as if it were like a best of 3, but you went back to the veto every single time or something. There's some interesting format you could probably scavenge out of that, and maybe we'll talk about that a little bit later. But I just think, like, I do think Astralis is a bit shambolic if you're going to try to say that they're top 5, and that's mostly just because like I can't ever really see them winning titles with a lineup that is really made up of most of these pieces. I don't know. Like, you'd think that's weird to say because Blame F and Config are so money, but I feel like at this point Glaive is on the sort of silver years of his career or whatever, where he's on the downward trajectory. We still are all generally out on Zipix. Like, he's a solid veteran force perhaps, but we don't expect him to do what he did in the Vitality match, for example, very often at all. And then Farley seems like, you know, he's all right. He's obviously an upgrade over Lucky, but, you know, he's not shocking the world necessarily with every time that he plays. And so that general vibe gives you a sense that like maybe everybody's just middling in that sense. And for a roster that seems overwhelmingly middling to me, minus the fact that they have some very explosive stars, I don't really see, like, it's great if they're able to get top 8 or a top 4 at a Cologne. Like, that's a very, you know, I would say an overachievement for them. And that's not where you would expect them to be. So hats off to them for doing that. I just don't think that there's longevity in that approach. So when I see Astralis, I see a team that they didn't make any roster changes. It's similar to NIP in that respect. That's why I thought that match was particularly interesting to check out. It was like a rapid fire debut of two of the rosters that really didn't make any changes whatsoever. And we saw who came out on top first, and then obviously that story changed later on. That was cool, but we're still not really in like the deep rounds against some of the elite teams. We've got an understrength Na'Vi we'll talk about later, and we've got a bunch of teams that are still finding their form. It's probably way too early to call. I just feel like Astralis are not, unless they make a change, they're not really destined for anything above a sneaky top 4 at best, basically. So I kind of look at the Cologne run as their peak.
Yeah, I mean, I'm totally in agreement, to be honest. Like, I think there are some good pieces. It's still the same old story, right? There are some good pieces. Farley has time, maybe, and could indeed improve. We're seeing a few flashes, a few moments. You know, Device was never the craziest of AWPers and whatnot, right? Fit into a system and performed well within that system. Maybe they're trying to build Farley to do the same, where it's not, you know, the most impressive, or how did he hit that shot, or, you know, what an insane 1v3 to bail the team out. Like, the Astralis rounds work in the past, at the least, based on, you know, sort of logic in a way, if that makes sense. So maybe they're trying to put him into that. I think Zip is still the one that it's a bit difficult. I don't know. I mean, maybe he brings, there's all this kind of, you know, the Jax element they've been a bit more public about. Maybe Zip does bring a bit more to the team in terms of the intangibles. I think another angle is finances. You know, you're going to bench him and he's going to cost you a lot to bench. And also, as well, who do you get, I suppose, right? There is always that argument, but
yeah, they missed the window to maybe pick up some people from Copenhagen Flames. That team is totally dissolved into the ether now, and it's just been woven into the fabric of CS broadly. So there's not really as many just like options, right? The people who were removed from Heroic as well, like Refresh is out. So like, yeah, who would you have gotten at that point? Like, it is a missed opportunity. They did want to stick with this 5. I just don't really see a trajectory where they hit tournament winning form anytime soon with that, you know?
Yeah. No, I definitely agree. But I think it's sort of an interesting conversation. Maybe one we'll have on a different episode, to be honest. But I think we're in a bit of a weird spot in terms of, you know, pro players and growing them. I think the Academy League is obviously really, really good for that. But I think there's a bit of a weird gap in the middle. We've got some youngsters coming up. We've got some players finishing, you know, and coming towards the end of their tenure, or, you know, like a Shocks moving down to a tier 2 team and things like that. But I think we have a bit of a gap in terms of, like, you know, super impressive journeyman players, right? And I think that we have seen that a bit in this transfer window, if you want to call it that, where there's been a few lackluster moves for my money. So I think on that level of like what we're talking about, where it's like, oh, we're not going to be making any moves, it's not a bad time to do that. And then I also think that logistically, you know, the field, as it were, doesn't have as much going on, but logistically it's difficult for them if they want to stick with the full Danish lineup, blah blah blah. But overall, I think it's as good a performance as you could maybe expect out of this team. We'll see how it goes. For me, if they, you know, make it into a semi or a final, or, well, maybe a semi at this tournament, in fairness. But I think that this is about where I would want them to be. Yeah, you've got a good mind. In theory, a good setup. You don't have Zonic anymore, but, you know, surely they still inherited some of the stuff that he laid down. And then you have 2 world-class players. Blame F, I think, continues to grow as perhaps becoming one of the best riflers in the world. Config is, a bit of a Yekindar, like, inimitable kind of style. I think that sometimes, and maybe it's because he's still on this injury thing, I'd be really curious, but sometimes a bit inconsistent, sometimes goes missing in massive games. But I do feel that 3-piece setup is really, really solid. It's just sort of the rest of it around them is still lacking a little. And that generally is the consensus. They're yet to break out. They've had the one game here, post-player break, where actually they have broken that mold, and it took them overtime to win it, right? There's a world in which one less clutch or whatever, and the game goes against them. So, yeah, I think this is about as good as we could expect Astralis to be. Any sort of other thoughts on Astralis, guys?
My last one is just kind of the blame. I'd say blame F versus. I kind of want to pit him against Rops really briefly, because I think that CT side, they don't necessarily have the same roles, but on T side, they do a lot of the time. And when Rops was coming up, it felt like a lot of people were very. I kind of just want to put this forward that basically when Rops was coming up, a lot of people were like, oh, this guy's so smart, so cerebral, his mechanics are so good. But he'd have a lot of rounds where it's just like he's left alive and he's on the other side of the map doing nothing. And people, for some reason, the community perception and opinion was so much higher on Rops that it was like, that's just because his team died or whatever, or something like that. And then Blame F is like the exact same. And then people are just like, bait F. And if bait F basically never came to be, if that weren't just such a memeable name, I almost don't, or that's not obviously the only reason, but if there were a few things in his narrative that worked a little bit differently for him, Blame F, the perception of Blame F should be as high, if not higher, than what people had for Rops, because this guy was not only doing that and putting up numbers as this kind of like lurker style, which generally a lot of teams put a bad player in. He was doing it while he was in-game leading, which is so much harder than what Rops had to do. I guess to give the other side a little bit of credit here, they would say like, oh, he's trying to set himself up in these baity positions or whatever. It's like, yeah, but like if he's getting this kind of output every game, then you have to consider the fact that it is producing on the scoreboard in a way similar to what Rops was doing. It's just that maybe the team around him wasn't as good. So that there's like, I don't know. I just kind of want to put it out there that I almost think that if you were standing Rops and saying that all these positive things about him, and then you just kind of turn on Blame F, it's like you realize it's basically the same thing. You're just kind of like biased because of things external to what they're producing in the server.
Yeah, you tell him, mate.
Fans biased? What? Yeah, no, it's true though. I mean, Blame F is one of those cases where it's like he's had a lot of he puts up a lot of numbers, he's good for production, and maybe he hasn't had the results that we expect to accompany that, and then like the narrative always seems to turn when you start hitting the getting the trophies. The other brief comment I'll make about Astralis is that I feel like because the legendary world beater Astralis lineup it has been elevated to such a mythical proportion that we kind of forget what the players were and like what some of the decisions that almost happened with that Astralis lineup. Where obviously like Config could have been on that instead of Magisk, right? And then there was the little like behind the scenes stuff that happened instead, where he wasn't a fit for the team chemistry, we would say. Obviously there was the Kirby section of that lineup too, and then he just bailed out to North. Great move, by the way. Good job. And then there's all this other stuff that like sort of intangibly created that team. And I think a big portion of why that's important and relevant to now is that Astralis will always live in their own sort of historical shadow as an org. Any players on it, as long as there's a vestige of the great legendary 5-man lineup. But don't forget that when Glaive took over the leadership duties, when Magisk came in, they were able to bet in new players. And these players weren't necessarily thought of as world beaters. Config was maybe a little bit more. He was thought of like as a crazy skilled player. But since I got Magisk instead, like people weren't necessarily expecting guns blazing, everything like to just click and everybody to pop heads, and that for them to elevate to that level of ridiculous powerhouse like year on year on year. And they still were able to do it. I think if Glaive isn't capable of doing that alongside Trace, you do have to give a lot of that credit retrospectively to Zonic in that respect. That's sort of just a little parting shout out that I have, is that like it does feel like maybe, you know, I mean, Zonic is undergoing his own test in Vitality, but irrespective of that, it's like if we don't see Glaive being able to replicate that success without Zonic, then you kind of get a little bit of a lead, maybe not a full, complete context, full answer, but a lead to the question of who was more responsible, or to what degree was Zonic responsible versus Glaive. It's an interesting thought experiment to have when you consider such a legendary lineup, and just try to remember what the context was when they were back there, or maybe go back and watch some of the desks or something at that time. It's like they weren't necessarily thinking this is going to be a world beater in the same sense. I mean, some of them really liked the move, but they needed time to shape up, and I don't know. I don't see Glaive reaching those heights anytime soon. Nothing against him, obviously. It's just that, like, that, for one, that's like a crazy accomplishment, and for another, I mean, you've parted ways with the piece. You would have to like strike gold with the second coach, and then also be able to like somehow reproduce all of that with the new players. And it's way more moving parts and variables now. It would be actually way more impressive if it happened a second time, but I just don't see that happening. So I think, yeah, it's probably true that Astralis are just going to stick around and be at this level as long as they're not willing to make more roster moves.
Yeah. And I mean, this is one of those things as well where it's like, you know, conventional sport's been around for a while. You can have these rotating dynasties, as it were, you know, where you maybe had a team in the 80s that was really solid, and then they had a resurgence in like the 2010s or whatever. But I think in esports we are a little, you know, the world's a lot faster, and everyone maybe expects things that we might be waiting a good few years, looking at a completely different roster led by an older Blame F, you know, and all this before they're able to get back to a similar sort of level. So you do have to, I think some people struggle to maybe contextualize with where we're at now. In this year, and obviously a few years removed from the super duper Astralis lineup. Let's move. I think a good segue would maybe a quick look at Vitality. Obviously, they've added Spinks ahead of this event. He sort of struggled a little bit to get going, I think, in like the very first half that he played, if I'm remembering correctly, and then overcame that moving forwards. Might have been in the second map though. But I don't know. I think they look better. They definitely look better. Honestly, I don't know that. I think NIP could have been a challenging game for them. OG maybe not so much. But yeah, I think you have to across the board agree that this is an upgrade at the moment, and they seem to be happy with the direction that they're moving in. It is somewhat of the Danish takeover, you know, and they're obviously now directing things a lot more than maybe was first thought. But maybe at the same time, you know, you've got players like Zywoo and everything sort of sick of losing. He looks a hell of a lot better as well, if it's possible to say. I think towards the end of the last season, he was kind of shaky, and, you know, they really needed him to pop off to win a game. But yeah, looking a little more consistent as a squad, to be honest, across the course of the best of ones.
Right. Well, I'll say Zywoo was pretty good at Cologne too. I think he's been ramping up in a nice direction. I'd say at the very end of the season he did well, but I can understand why you say that, because even a month before that it wasn't the best. But the Spinks move, the way I've characterized this one is that with how it's looking right now on paper, like there were a couple aspects for Vitality where I think most of us looked at the structure of this team and how the Danish/French styles weren't really working together. So people thought that's the main issue. Like, they didn't look at the players, and they frankly just said that this is kind of a calling style thing. This is them not meshing in terms of synergy. But immediately when this move came about, you have to say it's an upgrade. It's better. Spinks is better than Masuda. And the thing with Counter-Strike is there's no one way to win a game. You can win a game with tactics just as much as you can win a game with raw ability. And when you have a player that's raw, his ability and actually what he brings to a team in terms of mid-late round decision making is so much stronger than Masuda, you're just going to get more kills. You're going to win more rounds. And that's to me, it's a bit of a band-aid, but it's actually a little bit better than a band-aid. Like, this is an improvement. Like, you get hurt and then you're actually getting stronger too. Like, it's really not just one solution. And I think a lot of the critics of Vitality, when this happened, were kind of saying like, but this doesn't fix the structure. But it's like, sometimes just shooting more people is
Sure.
it's gonna be better than fixing structure. You don't have to do anything actually else. So this is Vitality taking a huge step in the right direction. If I rated the roster move based off of what I saw at Blast and kind of a little bit before, I probably beforehand I probably would have gave it like a B, and after what I saw at Blast, I'd probably upgrade it to a B plus. So this is good for them. I'm maybe actually B to A minus. Actually, I might go that far. Yeah, like I think it's very good for them. So this is a cool Vitality that, at the end of the day, do I think they're gonna win championships? I think they're gonna win that one where FaZe/Navi doesn't join the tournament, and then FaZe/Navi kind of gets bounced in a weird way from the tournament, and then Vitality just sneaks one. Just it's like it's totally doable for them. I would pin them right now at a top 5 team. Yeah, I think I could like, regardless of the rankings, wherever they are in those right now, I'm not sure. Probably like top 7 if I had to guess. They're a top 5 team for me now.
Yeah. I definitely...
Inarguable that it's an upgrade over Masuda for sure.
They are 7th.
Yeah.
They are 7th. Okay.
Yeah.
But yeah.
No, I was just gonna add that I think even Spinksy doesn't look super comfortable at this one. You know, maybe as compared to Ents, which is sort of to be expected, but he's still performing really well. And I think that this could be, you know, a key turning point in his career. Actually, you're learning so much. Like mechanically, he's already there, and I think a lot of people agree on that. But the sort of veterancy and the amount of different styles and experience and just the knowledge that he'll be able to build in this team could really see him becoming a super scary player. I don't know where, you know, one of the difficult things, I think there's still maybe another move that has to happen. You know, Dupree could possibly be moved for like a slightly, again, firepower might not be the only way, and you don't know what they're trying to build. Apex as well, the numbers have not been fantastic for a while. Apex is definitely the obvious one if you want to do that sort of, you know, again, raw input, as you're kind of saying, Maui. So I do feel that there's still possibly a move that has to happen here, but then it's difficult. You're a French org, you go from like a full French lineup, and you've slowly been slashing and slashing and slashing away at that. Are they ingrained enough at the moment? You know, like Astralis may be in Danish culture. Are Vitality ingrained enough? I'm not quite sure. So I think kicking your last French player might be a dangerous kind of move from that perspective. Unless you get another one in. Maybe that's the 200 IQ move. But yeah, I can definitely agree. I think that by the end of the year, solid top 5, maybe hitting that top 3, and maybe we'll see them have a cool rivalry with a FaZe/Navi where it's like they face them in a final, or they come up against them in a semi and it's a really tough game, and that shakes them off their game for the final, etc. I think that hopefully the 3 of those teams could actually be a bit more fun now that they're making some decent moves. But yeah, for me, I think maybe they'll stick with this one to the major, and then after that, move someone else, because I think there's still something that has to happen.
I want to put one more thing out there about Vitality, is that actually something that I really didn't, I think a lot of people underestimated, including myself, when this move first happened, is actually what really struck me over time, more so, that was a flaw with this lineup, is that I actually felt like there wasn't enough firepower. I thought I overrated how good Dupree and Magisk were as individuals coming into Vitality, because even with some of the language issues and maybe the structure not being to their liking all the time, just simply their CT side performances, to me, were sometimes worse than I thought. Because basically we got hit by what happened at the spring groups at the beginning of this year at Blast, where their defenses were so sick. And so I stopped caring about that for a long time with Vitality. I thought, surely it's a T-side problem. Their CT sides look like the reason they're winning some of these games. But actually, their T-side started getting a little bit better. And I started noticing that, oh, wow, like where I thought this was a multi-frag potential for, say, Magisk or Dupree, was only 1 kill. So that's something that I definitely want people to kind of look out for now, because if you look at who's going to be performing badly for this lineup, we've all seen Apex not do that well. Yeah, they could move Magisk to the IGL role to maybe bolster some firepower, but how many times are you going to play the like? If you do that now, then Magisk is surely going to start bottom fragging too. Like, just guarantee.
Yeah.
He's already not doing that well for himself, and so if he has that extra responsibility of calling in. He never called in English, by the way, when he's on Astralis. Like, that's a pretty safe assumption. So he's gonna have to work through a lot of that. And then, yeah, maybe that new fragger that they get is good, but it's not. It again, like I think right now, for me to love this Vitality lineup, Magisk and or Dupree need to be a little bit better now, which they can be because their one of their rotator players in actually he's not really rotating that much. I mean, one of their players in Spinks should just help you get frag. Like when one person's just fragging more, it gives you confidence to make your own plays more, or even just in the middle of a round set up a crossfire with a guy you know has your back better.
Yeah. Well, the Spinks is reliable, and he proved that on Ents. And I saw some weird takes of some people saying that he wasn't really proven at a LAN environment or whatever. If that is a genuine concern for some viewers, just realize you're talking about him joining one of the most tenured rosters in terms of individual players at this point, who have been around for a long time and had a lot of success. So, confidence on LAN is probably not going to be an issue when you look to your left and you see a bunch of major winners, and then you look to your right and you see Apex. No, I'm just kidding. Apex obviously is a good team. But the point is that you get a lot of you get a lot of value out of just being knowing that, like, you have successful veterans on your team. You're pretty good to go at that point. As Spinks in that position, I think it's a risk. Scriv was talking about his career and whether or not it would work out. I mean, it is a risk because you were on the come up with Ents, and the question is how much farther could you go? And it's funny because in terms of rankings, Ents was higher than Vitality, right? And maybe considerably so, and would almost always be favored to beat them in a head-to-head matchup. So to see Spinks sort of go down a step doesn't necessarily make sense, and if you're just looking at the stats and just looking at the ratings and results. But when you consider that Vitality is a much bigger org, we were talking about whether or not they're really ingrained in the French culture. It seems like it, even though obviously this lineup didn't even make it to the playoffs of the most recent major. They had their I don't want to use the term ultra because it apparently has some more violent connotations, but whatever the like super fans are, they had that were hyping everybody up, and they apparently were mostly French. So like apparently they're still ingrained in it. French fans and French organizations are a bit different. I mean, there's K Corp as well, if people aren't familiar, who are a little bit more active as far as esports are concerned in the league space. There's rumors that maybe some of them might start entering into CSGO coming next year or something like that. Could be interesting. But generally speaking, like, this is the sort of beacon for the French scene, even though they're not really fielding a ton of French players, right? So right now, that's just kind of interesting. I think as long as they have the French GOAT in Zywoo, right, as many people's minds, he's like really, really powerful as an opera, as a general all-around player. They're going to have a lot of fans in that respect. So yeah, this could be a roster that wins tournaments and takes it. It's just, to Maui's point way back at the start of this conversation topic, yeah, Spinks is more than a bandage, but it's still kind of over a gunshot wound, and I'm not sure if they're going to bleed out or if they're going to stitch it up in time. And that the issue I'm alluding to is really like the calming in multiple languages, or calming in English and stuff like that, and team dynamics, team chemistry. I hope that it works out for them. Obviously, Spinks is no stranger to international lineups, so he shouldn't be a problem in that. And maybe Masuda was, like, it's hard to know. But at least in terms of raw firepower, he's obviously an upgrade, and so I look forward to seeing this roster. This is a roster you can actually believe can do some damage, regardless of what you think about their team chem. Like, just in terms of the puncher's chance, you would always give Vitality at least a 30% odds, even against, like, say, a FaZe or a Na'Vi at full strength. So yeah, good move.
It's weird with teams like this because, the ceiling that some of the players have had in the past. Zywoo seems to still be there. Bit of drops off for a couple of the more tenured names. Apex, you can say maybe it's because he's in game leading, whatever. Maybe they do. Maybe they just flip that and see what Apex can do. Let off the leash, right? He was a relatively mean player before he was IGLing, so you never know. That might be an angle that they try. But yeah, it's really weird because I think you do, like you say, you kind of have to give them a bit of something because you never know. We've just seen on Astralis Zip hitting levels of 2018, 2019 that you maybe expect from him, and looking a lot better, right? So you never really know. It's hard to predict in that sense. But yeah, I think this should bring some more life into them. And indeed, on that mental level, I think also a really good point that they can trust him a bit more to do some of the heavy lifting and to have your back and etc. etc. So that could perhaps affect the way that you think, and you know, someone fresh, he's not part of the old team, so everyone can, you know, come around and make friends and feel good about having him, rather than, oh, I got to be careful what I say to Masuta because Apex might come to his defense, and then all of a sudden we've got, you know, a domestic in the middle of the series. So you never know.
Polish VP vibes right there.
Yeah, right, exactly. There's an argument. I don't think it'd get that serious, but there is an argument to be made that it's like, this guy is covered, or this guy is, you know, friends with others, so they're gonna step up more for him, whereas Spinks is the level playing field, so to speak. Let's move on. I think we've talked about a little bit of this squad, so maybe keep it a bit quicker. You know, concerned about time here, but NIP. Again, for me, you know, I was fully going into the Stockholm Major, fully on the train. I was with Richard Lewis. You know, I felt like they perhaps could take it and be one of the favorites. And every time you start giving this team some belief, they kind of disappoint. And I think that this, for me, is another disappointment. Yeah, to be perfectly honest, I think that they are still suffering, even with, you know, Esatag is one angle, Orping, etc., but they've added Brawlen. It feels like they should have a lot more firepower in that sense, and it's still on a very basic level, maybe, but it still feels like if Rez does not perform, then they can't get the games over the line. And that at the very least in this group has happened again.
Well, the weird thing about NIP to me is that they almost seem like a mirror image of Astralis, which is funny considering the organizations and their quality. But the actual teams seem very similar to me in that, like, you have all this firepower. You have all of the really, like, high level players that you would really want to be popping off in that respect. And I just think about, like, why aren't they finding the same success? Like with Astralis, I can understand it more, even though maybe they have like the same sort of structure with the stars that you would expect, and maybe they don't always hit, like we were talking about Rez and obviously Brawlen. But with NIP, it's like, what could be the issue exactly? Like, is it the Esatag op? Is it that you don't, like, do you need to give you know, some people a call and see if I'm blanking on the dude's name, the guy who device replaced to then say bye for like a year plus.
Knock, right?
Knock, yeah. You need to give Knock a call or somebody. I don't know. Like, do we need a more like steadfast op presence? Is that the issue? I just can't really put a pin in it because they always seem to have a different flaw that costs them at least a couple rounds in any given match. And so it's an enigma, even though like you look at it, it's similar to Astralis, but they're losing for different reasons. And I don't think you would begrudge them the loss against Vitality up last, but I definitely think they could have done better. They could have brought it closer on Ancient. That's something that Mauisnake brought up a little bit earlier when we were talking about Astralis. It's just, how did they not get a little bit closer? How did they not look a little bit more competitive in that particular map? That's probably my biggest question right now. And also, what exactly is wrong? Do you have any ideas, Alex?
No, I'm not gonna say I watched that one. I missed that map of
no, just broadly speaking about NIP in general. Yeah.
Okay, well, I think with NIP, they're just a team right now that constantly do actually kind of opposite of what you want them to do. Like, Scrib was talking about how you start getting expectations for them and then they fall a little short. That's exactly what happened at Cologne, where basically they went through a lower bracket and think they had to be like either a G2 or a Vitality or something like that. And I personally always have a little bit more faith in NIP because they proved me wrong so many times. So eventually I was like, fine, I'll just believe in you guys a little bit more. And then they lose to Maus in like a really choky game. Where they were up 8-2 on map 2 after winning map 1, then they lose the whole series. And so with NIP, I can't really put my finger on one thing because I mean, like, you could always, the easiest take is always that Esatag could be better as an opper, but I actually thought he did pretty well in the opening map that I caught of them on Overpass. So I didn't really hate what he brought them. I guess getting the most out of every player consistently is something up. Like, if I'm trying to like just look at this team right now, it's tough for me to really say. Like, it almost feels like sometimes a mental battle that they're losing, where they can never bring the best out of themselves at the same time. and that's really like every team wants to get the most out of their star players simultaneously. But for some reason, it feels like when it's almost like the mentality of this team is when one person is doing well, we need to give them a lot of space and we need to cater to them a little bit more than we otherwise would. Or maybe it's a mentality thing like that, because you'll see these games where I don't know, like when Brolin came into the lineup, they're like, oh well, he's gonna get all the resources, and then kind of for some reason everybody just takes a back seat for a little while, and then they're like, wait a second, no, I should do more, and then it's like this musical chairs of who's doing well on this team, because I can point at Hampus, Rez, or Brolin as a guy that should top frag, but then sometimes it's literally Esatag, and like I don't know, I don't know why they can't seem to figure out who's getting the resources every single game. Because even when I talk to them in person about stuff like this, Esatag was like, "Well, I should give him the resources. I should be doing like I should be the support opera right here." And it's like, and then it's like, but come on, you got the op. Like, don't do that. So I wish I think their structure is okay, but I do think teams need to have a light ordering of priority in terms of who is going to be the point man and who should we be looking to assist the most in various situations. And I think NIP are never really ironing that out.
I don't know. It's weird. It is definitely yeah, because I remember seeing like on the Overpass game, that first game that you're talking about, Esatag opened a round. I think he got like a 3K or whatever on the B-bomb site. Very cool. It was a bit fast. It wasn't amazing, but you know, it was a good play. Yeah. And he just sort of like in the middle of the round, they not necessarily cleaned up. It was like 2v4 or whatever. And he just sort of had one of those, you know, you see players like obviously the emotion comes out and they're like shaking and whatever, like the mouse goes a bit wild after they've pulled off a clutch. And it just felt a bit weird to me that he did it like in the middle of the round. They hadn't necessarily won yet. And it felt like maybe to him that play is not meant to happen and he's gone so above and beyond that he can't control himself in a sense. You never really know, right? He might just be fucking about, I don't know, or whatever. But it just sort of speaks to where things are at with the team. There always seems to be an issue. There always seems to be something that they've got to get over. So you do have to sympathize with them in that sense. And I think they were ready for this relatively young team. You've only really got like, you know, Rez, who's got the super tenured experience, still relatively young. Obviously names that have been around, but playing at the very high level where the NIP organization expects their team to be. And then you get Device come in and it's like, right, here we go. You know, this is really going to, and things don't go well. And it's hard because you can't get necessarily annoyed at Device. I think the only people that can are the people that, you know, have paid the money. But the team can't really get annoyed. They can see where he's coming from, etc., etc., etc. So they've always had something since then that they've had to overcome. So I do sympathize in that sense, but yeah, I don't know. I think maybe the whole project is in a weird spot because of that. And it's a bit cursed, you know. And maybe they do just need to go, right, we've got Rez, he's cool. Maybe we keep Esatag because we need an AWPer. And then just back to the drawing board for the rest of it. Like, Brolin, for me, has been pretty lackluster joining this team so far. And again, like you say, it seems, you know, all signs would point to indeed setting this guy up and getting him to come in as your star, which we've just talked about Vitality. They've done that, like, instantly off the bat with Spinks. But that doesn't seem to be the way that they're playing. Like, they don't... I think it just kind of... We play the game out, right... Rez is fragging, everything to him. Brolin's fragging, everything to him. Plopsky's having a game, everything to him. You know, and then that level of consistency just isn't there for them, which you're going to beat your OGs doing that. You're maybe going to beat your Astralises, but they got the return. Like, I think that is the perfect, because they just came back a few hours later and beat them, you know, and it looked not too much of a challenge. If they were able to, you know, get it over you on a close whatever, but... It just wasn't really the case. So I think they maybe don't fully recognize how they are winning games.
Well, they got grand total of 2 T rounds on Ancients, so against Astralis. Maybe the old Hampus curse coming back to bite them. I don't know. I remember people saying like DJL's looking pretty good. Like, hell, wow, maybe this T side stuff isn't so bad after all for NEP. And then I mean, maybe it's again early to call, just some best of ones, some blast of ones, but still, like, I mean, these are against teams that should be winnable or at least close. And you bring up Device, Mauisnake. I have to ask: is Device the most expensive bench surfer, or do you think he challenges Nifty, or like how high are we going here? Because I feel like it's probably high, but Nifty was a lot longer. I feel like, is that true?
So Nifty was longer, and he was never technically on the bench.
Right.
So there's no reason that he shouldn't have been getting paid full salary. Whereas
that's an idea.
Unless Device's salary is literally over double, because sometimes your bench salary is 1/3, sometimes it's 1/2. So let's just say, for the sake of this, it's just under a half. I don't know if Device is making over double what Nifty was making on Envy, because we all know that, I mean, Nifty was making so much money that Hastro told Note to go back to a Roach motel. So, I mean, it was probably a pretty expensive contract that he was just setting on fire. So I think Nifty still probably has it for least total games played to money.
Oh, the ratio of it, yeah.
Yeah,
sure. Yeah. Okay.
All right. What I will say here, I think we can maybe touch on the format in this before we kind of move on. Anyone want to say anything about OG? I think it's the cool moves. It's a bit too early. They've got a lot of young players. I think that this is more of a project that is definitely in for the long term. And even then, you really don't know. Neofrag's got a bit. Fiku has like hardly any at this kind of level. So I think that I'm not expecting too much out of this team. Ask me at the start of next year. You know what I mean? Like, I think they need a major cycle to really play through. I don't know if anyone else has got anything else to add to that.
Just that I think that Dexter is a much better fit as an Opper under Nexa than Montu, where Montu seemed after a while with Nexa to lose a lot of what made him good, because I'm just strongly assuming now that Alexi microed Montu a bunch more than Nexa did. So Dexter's a guy that has a better read for the game. He's actually just almost better in every single facet of the game than Montu. So I wouldn't really expect this lineup. Like, I mean, Fiku and Neofrag are kind of, like, they're really raw and inexperienced, which is also a reason that Nexa's probably not the best IGL for them. But at least Dexter and Nexa, that could be like, if you actually just took this lineup and picked apart like who could work with each other well, like Flames, Dexter, and Nexa would be the three I start with, and then maybe Neofrag or Fiku develop over time. But if not, just you could slot in easily one more kind of wash veteran. Like, this would have been a cool landing spot for a player like Shox.
Yep, agreed.
If he got the Fiku roles or whatever, then he would have brought a lot of insight, a lot of veteran prowess, and then this team, in my eyes, would be just probably like 4 ranking points higher, four slots higher in the top 20 or whatever, wherever they are right now. I don't know what rank they are, but yeah.
My point on OG is actually not related to OG directly at all, but I find it interesting that it was claimed that Nexa didn't want an IGL, and then he takes an IGL's position somewhere else when he was on the exit from G2. Yeah. It's like, maybe the subtext, I mean, for all the people who are saying Nico reformed or whatever, like, I don't know, man. I mean, maybe it's just a personality conflict. Like, nobody's there, nobody's in the a fly on the wall or whatever. But it's telling that he's like, I have no interest in IGLing now. Let me swap with Alexi B. Yeah, okay. All right. I see you, Nexa. I see you. That's my point. That's it.
All right. So, let's move on to the format. Obviously, I don't know. It's kind of a weird one, right? Because this is very similar. Now that I'm just sort of refreshing and zooming in on each bit and who goes where and all this, it's very similar to the way that I think the conference stage is working for Pro League, where you don't really have like a defined final. You're not really, you're still guaranteed a spot moving forwards. I'd even say in conference you don't get that actually. So yeah, I don't know. I think this is where things are maybe headed, in a sense that we're looking at a lot more partner teams coming on board, etc., etc. And so you're guaranteed games and you're guaranteed a bit of prize pool in a sense as well, because every team gets a payout here, no matter where you place, and every team gets put into another event where, you know, if you're good enough to make the fall final, you are possibly good enough to win it. If you're not good enough to make it, you are probably in a spot where you could win the showdown against, you know, a few lesser teams, a few teams that are coming up through the qualifiers. So I do get it. I get it from a business standpoint. I do think, however, it removes some of the stakes for the tournament itself, makes it feel a bit strange in places, and, you know, as well, it's like you win that opening best of one, and you're actually getting yourself in a pretty good spot seeding-wise as well, even if you do go on to sort of get knocked out, in theory, from the group stage a little bit later on. So, yeah,
Is seeding mostly what you're playing for between first and third to
I think so.
fourth to sixth?
I think
because
so.
there's like a little bit of money, but I think
it's another one of those formats, man, where even, you know, looking down it on HLTV on Liquipedia, it's a bit weird to tell and weird to fully understand until the games come about and you're like, this is how we got here. But it does look that way. You know, OG and NIP, I don't know, it looks like they're in similar-ish spots with where they've been, and then, you know, a few days off for the likes of Astralis and, you know, whatnot. But yeah, it looks like fourth and third, which is kind of yet to be from other groups, right? Other groups playing off against each other. Fourth and third will play each other, and things like that. So I think you do get slightly better seeding. No. Yeah.
Maybe.
Yeah. No, I think that is the case. But then because there's also only 3 groups, it gets a little weird. You can't match everything up perfectly in that sense.
So what gets me about this, right, is that, like, as if you had to come to me and you were pitching an idea for a format, and specifically you wanted this format to be like Roster Mania results, here's the first, like, little almost exhibition moment for all the teams to show off their new rosters or their old rosters in the case of Nip and Astralis. It's like, that's an actual, you know, it's an interesting and compelling idea. Sad for them that Navi ended up not fielding Simple for this event, but like beyond that, you get the idea of like, oh, there's really some cool stuff at play here. You could do a lot of really interesting things. If you do decide to go the best of one angle to open things up, I like the fact actually that Astralis played a lot of matches in the first round. That's like proving that they're like, maybe it's a little bit of their veteran talent. We didn't really touch on this earlier, but the fact that they had to play 4 best of ones, you know, that's more than you would ever play in a best of 3, a single best of 3. That's kind of interesting. If you took it to be 3 instead, Max, maybe that would be more fair or something. But I like the idea of basically doing, I don't know if round robin would be the good format for this, but some idea of like, you just play out best of ones. I guess this is sort of like Swiss system stuff where you play a series of best of ones or whatever, what have you, against like the teams that are better. So there's some elements there that are interesting. If you decided to go with that, and that's just the exhibition, and it's just there to give us really fast moving, like, looks at all of the different teams, and like that aspect is cool, but I usually don't find best of ones particularly telling for like long term who's going to be the best. Like, that's why I thought it was interesting that Astralis had to play so many and against so many different opponents. I think it's actually a lot more exhausting to prepare for different opponents each time, even though you might be playing less than like 2 best of 3s or something, less maps overall. It's still like a lot of prep. It's very mentally draining, I imagine. So I think that's an interesting angle. But yeah, I mean, I don't even really know how you would improve the format in that particular sense. It's just like, maybe you'd make it take longer overall. Like, you'd have a more involved setup with this. Maybe you only have 2 groups instead of 3, but you have 6 teams to a group. That could be one thing, and then everybody plays everybody a little bit. If you're going to go the exhibition angle, and this is always going to be a staple, and this is always going to be the tournament after the break, that could be interesting, and I think that would be pretty neat. But I don't even know if that's going to be true, because I think the breaks are different next year, so we'll have to wait and see on that one. So,
I mean, this is the same format from the spring for Blast. I think, I mean, with every format like this, you're just like, it's not a conspiracy anymore. It's just fact that these teams just want to play each other as much as humanly possible to inflate their ranking points for HLTV's sake. And so that's just where all of this has taken us, and that's kind of a flaw. That's more in my opinion. Well, like, they want enough broadcast hours, so it's like a couple people want to win here. Blast want enough broadcast hours that they can fill a whole day, and that this does that just fine. And these teams want enough matches that they can all eat each other's points, and well, actually, you don't even eat each other's points. You just create points.
Yeah.
By
Yeah,
playing each
sure.
other, you're just creating more points. So you're artificially inflating your position in the world ranking. So everybody is happy about that, giving all these opportunities. Like, tell me, like, Complexity is so happy right now that they got that one BO1 win over Navi, because they were out of the top 30, and now I think that could probably move them up. Well, actually, let me see what their actual ranking is, because I think that one victory over a top 2 team on LAN is enough to really catapult them to. So they were 47th. If they're not top 32 or 33 after this week, I'd be shocked. Like, that's just, that one win can do just so much for you, and that's these high variance matches. That's just perfect for them. So I'm not really like, I don't think anybody is really against this in terms of broadcast side or in terms of team side. I think we all know I think BO1s actually also kind of have a, I think they're a little bit more valuable in terms of how good they are. It's just that it's right after the player break, so
Yeah.
you're basically maximizing all possible variants, and that's where these results get pretty tricky to interpret with any meaning. But if this were, let's say, right after Cologne, I wouldn't think that these results are too crazy.
Right.
Other than substitute situations like Simple being out. If Simple's in for Navi, I don't really think that Complexity beat him, even in a BO1. You know, like,
Yeah.
just the better team wins the map, especially if it's a middle ground map like that, more often than not.
Well, the other thing too is, do you think there's a lot of grounds to the idea that Blast are specifically designing formats so that they can maximize the number of partner teams that actually make it to the final events? Because that's another angle that people have said as a critique.
Oh,
Probably.
yeah. I mean, it is their circuit. It's also,
Yeah.
these formats are made with the teams, so it's kind of, I think the back and
Oh, I
forth goes
see.
something.
Yeah.
It goes something like Blast propose, player teams meet, they back and forth ping pong it until it's a format that everybody's comfortable with. So you like, it's like the TO takes the fall for this if people are really upset about it, but it's really the teams are the ones that have the final. I think the teams are the ones that actually have the final say. Like, Blast couldn't just come tomorrow and be like, okay, we're gonna just make this the sickest tournament for viewership ever for us, which is just everybody's doing show matches except for Navi and FaZe. You're doing a BO5. like,
Yeah.
Okay.
Everybody would tune in, everybody would watch, and so that'd be winning for them. And but yeah.
No, I think definitely a large part of it has to be the fact that, you know, we've got these partner teams and they want some kind of guarantee, especially when you are Blast, because, you know, they want to keep people, they have to maybe keep people a bit more interested than ESL. Yeah, because ESL have already got your prestigious events and bigger prize pools in places, more tournaments going on throughout the year. So it's good to become a partner team. That's good for sustainability. Whereas Blast need a little bit more. We want you to be a partner team because we want to stick around, but they have to provide some more incentives, you know. And I think that that's a pretty big angle actually for the organizations.
They have to cater to them more.
Yeah, absolutely, right. And to sort of get them, and it's like, well, if we're going to enter into your tournaments, we maybe need a little bit more of a guarantee. Also, it's like, look, if I get a deep run in Cologne, I am getting loads of exposure from that because it goes on for so long and it's such a big event. So we have to maybe artificially, in a way, increase the exposure that I'm getting from a Blast event, in theory, by adding, you know, it feels like these group stages that they're doing aren't necessarily, from like a competitive standpoint, aren't necessarily needed. Yeah, you can just sort of add those into your fall finals and have it a bit more stake heavy. You know, you lose the first game, you're down into a best of 3 elimination, and then you're gone by the end of the day. Whereas obviously this tournament is extended by, you could argue, a couple days by not really having anyone drop out for a while. But I do get it. And it's more Counter-Strike, and it's more, you know, we're always going to sit and we're always going to maybe complain from there should be more competition, but it's not really the case, right? And again, you know, you can look at conventional sports, the way that money works in there and buyouts work, and, you know, new ownership coming in and all this sort of stuff. Like pretty famous one when I was into it, when I was a bit younger, is like 2010, 2011, when Manchester City were bought out. They were sort of like a mid-level team. Maybe they'd make the Europa League for people that are into it. Again, I'm not a massive expert, so I could even be wrong on that. But they were bought out, and then all of a sudden, within 2 years, they are an unstoppable force, winning, you know, and it's like, is that really fair? You know, you just come in and all of a sudden you've had an injection of loads of money and that's why you're winning. It's not because you've overcome, etc., etc. So I think there's always going to be people sat around arguing and saying, look, we need more integrity. The competition is not fair enough and all this. And it's like, well, yeah, but Blast, you do have to have a bit of sympathy towards them. They are playing second fiddle in a sense. And they, as yet, have not had a cash injection of $1 billion out of nowhere, you know? So I can kind of get on board from a pragmatics point of view in that sense. But look, I don't know if we want to touch on, obviously, we've talked pretty intently there about Group A, about the format. Group B is not really finished as yet, so I don't know if you guys want to go into that. I know that we could be concerned about time. I am totally happy to finish off here if you want.
I mean, one thought that I just have is that just based off of how things have shaped up and how good Liquid looked in their opener that I saw, I want this Yakindar deal finalized already, because this team is on such another level when they have him versus if they just have to take some scrap player from NA, or I don't even know who's available. Maybe like even a Valde is such a huge downgrade. If they ended up getting a Valde type person instead of Yakinder, I think that's just so much worse for them, because it's just personality type and the style that he plays. Everything is working right now for Liquid. I only really was keeping track of them in complexity, if I'm being honest. So I think that, like, I just want this to happen already so I can stop holding my breath on this and I can finally exhale.
Complexity started off pretty promising, only a narrow loss to Liquid, but as of earlier in this conversation, 16-3 to Navi.
Yes.
All right.
I think that
Rest
game
in peace, NA.
Just starting. I mentioned it at the start, and then it's finished, well, relatively quickly. But yeah, look, I mean, I'm happy to finish off there, fellas. To be honest with you, I think we'd probably be around for another 45 minutes if we went into Group B as well. And there's a likelihood that, you know, by this time next week we'll have a bit more to work off of in terms of the blast, as they say. But yeah, thank you very much once again, Maui, for coming on. You know, always appreciate it, and great conversation all around by the three of us. Really happy with the way the episode went, and of course, Pronogo, you know, always good to have you by my side. I appreciate it. So, yeah, lovely stuff.
Or above you, as it is.
Well,
right
yes,
now, because,
I think
you know,
that might be our gimmick. In terms of, I've been looking for a way to maybe intro the show. I think perhaps our gimmick will be that you never know where to look and who's going to be where and who's popping out from.
We'll start changing Discord aliases just so that we can have the
maybe. I don't know, mate.
I'll be Z Pronogo next time, and I'll be on the bottom. We'll see. We'll do something fun with it.
Yeah, we'll work it out. But yeah, thanks very much for watching. If you've been here up until the end, really do appreciate it. And of course, I guess we'll leave you with the lovely dulcet tones of Vu to tell you to go and check out another video.
Thanks for watching, and if you enjoyed this podcast, check out this video right here.